How does, then, the state do this? How does this intent play? And more importantly, what is it that legal theorists and lawyers can do to make sense of this idea of intent? Because it's so intangible. It is what defines the code, yet when we're talking about this, I don't have anything to grasp when we're talking about intent. There's going to be 3 stages in which a state will, I argue, exercise and demonstrate their intent to destroy a targeted group within their domestic jurisdiction. First is the selective phase. So the 3 phases, the first is the selective phase. The state sits amongst themselves and we decide, let's say Professor Lee and I decide as a state, we're going to select all those bearing, let's say, immutable demographic identifiers. If your hair is shorter than shoulder length, you're set for extermination. Okay, well if it's set for, did I say immutable or mutable? I'm not sure what I said. That's immutable, sorry. You can cut your hair and you'll be allowed to survive. Well, okay, no problem. So you cut your hair, you conform to state pressure. If the state says that I'm going to exterminate you if you are a woman, barring gender change, which I'm also interested in on a side note. Barring gender change, that's pretty immutable. There's nothing that you can do. So the state selects the identifiers that they want to purge from the population. And they're that arbitrary. And you know, that sounds like a silly example when I talked about haircutting. In the Cambodian genocide, my professor Edward Kissy at the University of South Florida documents in his comparative genocide analysis between Ethiopia and Cambodia an instance where the Khmer said, and they appropriated ad hoc blue armbands. Oh. If you had a blue armband, guess what? If you didn't have a blue armband, you're fine. It was that arbitrary. It's just that arbitrary because it's the power of the state. We can decide to do whatever it is that we want to do. Okay, so the first phase is the selective phase. The second phase is what's known as the transformative phase. What is transformative phase? What I need to do is I need to transform a common citizen into an enemy of the state. How do I transform a regular citizen into an enemy of the state? Well, Frank Shaw, noted genocide theorist, says that you formulate what's known as an exclusionary ideology. In Nazi Germany, the ideology was that Jewish people were intent on destroying the German people. They were intent on destroying heritage. They were intent on monopolizing the territorial jurisdiction. You then dehumanize the population. They're lice, they're maggots, they're leeches. In Rwanda, the Tutsi-Hutu conflict, the RTLM, which was radio propaganda distributed, often characterized Tutsi as, well, these people are subhuman. These people don't deserve to live. So what I'm doing now is I'm transforming how the population views regular citizens. You're no longer a citizen, you're an enemy, you're a threat to me. And then what happens next? The last phase being the purgative phase. We need to purge these people from the population now. I don't look at you as a human being anymore. I don't acknowledge that you're a human anymore. Therefore, my extermination is facilitated by this intent to destroy. So it's a very orchestrated thing. Where it becomes difficult for lawyers and legal theorists is that it's hard to prove intent. How do you prove intent? Now, that's a whole other discussion. I don't think I'm going to be able to address that in my time. Professor Donovan brought up one point, and he was exactly on the money. He could have quoted the line. 4 complications, the last thing I'm going to end with is the 4 complications in prosecuting a sovereign nation. He addressed the very first point, which is defending those targeted undermines national sovereignty. If you attempt as an NGO, as an international body, to intervene on behalf of those who are targeted for extermination, you do so at the expense of undermining national sovereignty. I can't both recognize sovereignty and help these people. I have to overlook sovereignty in order to help these people. The second complication is just the inverse. Not defending those targeted for extermination shows a sense of indifference or complacency. I am going to recognize state sovereignty at the expense of these people. State sovereignty is such a powerful concept that I am going to allow what's happening, and I would argue that this is the problem for Darfur. I am going to allow what's happening in the Sudan to continue to happen because it would be the most egregious offense to undermine national sovereignty. So you lose either way. Thirdly, proving intent is difficult. And I call this the politics of discrimination. And if you look in the Montgomery bus boycotts during the civil rights era, how do you go about proving that the state has in law a practice which is overtly discriminatory? It's not that easy. It's not that easy. But if you can show that the state has overtly endorsed policy which discriminates against members of the population, then you have a change. You have the possibility for social revolution, right? For Rosa Parks to refuse to sit on a bus, the back of the bus, and I tell my students when I'm teaching at University of South Florida, when I was teaching African Studies, you don't really understand how powerful an act that is. Oh, well, Dr. Campbell, all she did was sit down. Well, at the time I was TA Campbell. All she did was sit down. Well, she challenged the status quo. She challenged that authority. And in challenging that authority, she made the lawyers, she made the prosecutors look at the law to see if the law itself was in violation. And the last point, as I sense Dr. Lee's presence, is the notion. Very, very, very subtle. The last point is that the notion of intent referenced by the UNGC must be articulated with reference to national sovereignty. And Professor Donahoe explained it perfectly. It seems as if, and this might not be what he's saying, but I might take it a little further, this might be what he's saying, is that it seems like the sense of intent might be a little individualistic, and that's harder to apply to a state. We need to reformulate how we discuss intent, and we need to talk about intent not as criminal culpability, but as national culpability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell.